Hello everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Brighter Futures Conference. This conference is a series of workshops bringing together educational leaders from all over the world to look at the challenges and opportunities that are facing education establishments due to the pandemic and as we move towards getting through the pandemic. My name is John Grant, and I'm the head of key accounts in the Learning Solutions team at Cambridge University Press, and I will be your host today for today's session with Nicky Hockly. So before I introduce Nicky, I just have a few admin points to cover off. So if you have a question for Nicky, please can you add that to the Q&A box and not the chat box? We will gather those together and we'll run through as many as we can at the end of the session. The PowerPoint slides for today will not be shared, but we are recording the session, so you can view that later on our YouTube channel. If you RSVP'd to the invite for this event, you will and you also will be sent an email on the 26th of February with your personalized certificate of attendance, plus the links to the recordings. But if you haven't RSVP'd, you can still do this by going through our event webpage. So, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Nicky, and her topic today will be creating a brighter future with blended learning. A few words about Nicky. So Nicky Hockly is the Director of Pedagogy at the Consultants E, so a very well-respected online training and development organization. She is an established author in the field of learning technologies for ELT, and also the author of a forthcoming book for Cambridge on learning technologies. Nicky has written over 8 methodology books since 2007, and her solo books and co-authored books have been nominated and won several prizes. So it's a real pleasure to have such an expert with us today. I will hand the microphone over to you, Nicky, now.
Thank you very much, John, for that introduction, and hello everybody and welcome. And it's nice to see some familiar names in the attendance list there. So hello everybody. I'm greeting you, in fact, from very sunny Spain. You can see the light streaming in here in my window. Yes, I've been living here for 35 years. Can you imagine? I'm going to be looking a little bit at the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic to date. It's been almost over a year, and looking at how we can try to ensure a brighter future for our institutions. As I understand it, most of you are in fact directors, academic directors, directors of studies and so on of schools. So we'll be looking at things from a slightly strategic perspective rather than only from the teacher's perspective. As John mentioned, I've written quite a few methodology books about technology. You can see that's the kind of common theme here. I don't yet have a cover for my forthcoming title with Cambridge University Press, unfortunately, but yes, it's another one about technology, specifically technology and its application to English language teaching. So that applies to face-to-face teaching, the face-to-face classroom, physical classroom, and of course, online and blended teaching. That's really my area of interest. And I've been, I come from the classroom myself. I'm a teacher and teacher trainer from years back. But my main interest is this, the application of technology, and specifically at the moment, the kind of effect that COVID has had on institutions and, of course, our necessary use of technology at the moment. So I'd like to get started. There are 3 questions that I would like to address. The first one is what the impact of COVID has been on English language teaching institutions. Some of you may be working with private language schools or PLS, private language schools, or perhaps in universities or larger institutions. What are the lessons that we've learned from this pandemic now over a year? And what can these lessons teach us about future-proofing our institutions? Those are the 3 things I'd like to look at in the next 30 odd minutes. We will have 15 minutes at the end, by the way, for questions, but I do have the chat box open and I'm going to try and keep an eye on that as we go through. So first of all, I'm sure I don't need to tell you any of this, but the pandemic, when it kind of arrived, full on, in March and April of last year, we had to change the way that we were teaching in many of our institutions. And these are the 7 different teaching scenarios that I've been able to identify from looking at some of the research and writing that's been happening since then. The first one is, of course, the fully face-to-face physical classroom. So, life as it was before. As the pandemic has gone on, we've seen schools cycling in and out of this. Sometimes you've been able to go back to your normal scenario, as it were, but in other cases, you've had to move back into or out into blended and online options. So scenario number 1 is this fully face-to-face physical classroom scenario. The second one is the face-to-face rotation, and that's something that we've been seeing here in Spain, where I am, at, for example, baccalaureate level, so A level, slightly post-secondary level. My stepson, for example, is doing a baccalaureate course at the moment, and he's been going to school, or the institution rather, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays in 1 week, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays he's doing work online on his own. And then the following week he's going into the school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday he's doing work online on his own. But it's kind of asynchronous work, almost like homework type stuff, working through documents and things that are online. So that's what we can call face-to-face rotation. The third scenario that's been fairly common is fully online. So the school closes down completely, and then we have a fully online course offering, which usually will involve synchronous or real-time classes like this, video conferencing usually, and then possibly also combined with asynchronous work, so work that's not in real time, possibly through some kind of virtual learning environment like Moodle or course book materials that might be online and that students work through in their own time. The fourth scenario is the blended one, where we have some face-to-face physical work in the school and some work online in whatever kind of blend. The fifth scenario is this term hybrid that has become very popular in our profession since last March. Hybrid used to be used as a synonym just for blended learning, but it's taken on special significance in the profession since the pandemic. Hybrid here is referring to this idea of simultaneous face-to-face or physical classes happening and having students online at the same time. So you'll have the teacher in front of the class, you'll have some of the students actually physically in the school, and other students will be attending online through video conferencing, but they are simultaneously in the same lesson, if you like, at the same time, some in the physical space and some in the virtual space. Another term for this hybrid that we've been using a lot is high flex, which comes from the combination of the word hybrid and flexible. I think it's worth mentioning that this hybrid model that's kind of taken us all by surprise since last March is in fact nothing new. This has been around for over a decade. It's been used in several institutions, particularly at university level. For example, the State University of Arizona, Arizona State University, ASU, in the United States has been using the high flex model for quite a long time. There's been a lot of this high flex or hybrid teaching happening in Australia as well. So there's actually been some research into this. It's not new, although it is fairly new, I think, within the world of English language teaching. So that's scenario number 5. Scenario number 6 is this idea of hybrid rotation, or at least that's what I'm calling it, where we might have a deliberate division of your class. Let's say you have 20 students. You'll have 10 face-to-face in the physical classroom, and the other 10 will be online at the same time on a Monday. On a Tuesday, you swap. So those who are in the physical classroom on Monday are online on Tuesday, and vice versa. So it's the same as scenario number 5, but it's much more planned. Scenario number 5, which is the ad hoc hybrid scenario, if you like, tends to work when students perhaps have to self-isolate unexpectedly for a couple of weeks, and they're coming in and out of the school. And then there's possibly a 7th scenario that I haven't been able to identify, and if there is, please let me know. So my question for you at this point, in the chat window, if you could open the chat box, think about your institution and which of these scenarios you've been using over the past year. It's quite possible that you've used several of them. Could you just put the numbers in the chat box and let me see which is the most common scenarios? Which are the most common scenarios that we've been using? I'm assuming everybody has access to the chat box. Yes, you do. Okay. So Alina has put their number 3, right? They've gone fully online in her institution. Melissa, on the other hand, has gone fully online, plus blended, plus hybrid. Okay, Melissa, I guess you didn't sleep much. Silvana, same thing. They've been doing some online and blended. Several of you fully online. Yeah, interesting. Could you just, as there's only a few of us here, could you just type in the chat box what kind of institution you're working in? Because, for example, if you're working in a university, often universities in a country have all had to go online, whereas private language schools have had a little bit more leeway. Anna is saying that she's been number 3, which is fully online. Yeah, okay, Alina, right, university. Often universities have had to go fully online as a kind of a government directive, right? Yeah, and Anna, a private bilingual school, Silvana in a private language school where you maybe have a little bit more leeway, you know, within the restrictions imposed by your government, of course. Yeah. So has anybody used, somebody put hybrid, didn't they? Number 5. Yeah, Melissa has had some experience of the hybrid model. Okay. All right, thanks. We'll come back to that in a second. Thank you for your contributions. Okay, so we've had the impact of the pandemic on our teaching scenarios. What about on teachers? Now, reading through all of the literature that's come out since the pandemic and the surveys that have been done and the studies and so on, there are a couple of positives that have been identified. And while I go through these positives, I would like to invite you to think about what positives you've seen among your teachers and learners. I put the teachers and learners together just in the interest of time. Please feel free to add your positives in the chat box as we go through. You may have some more positives than those that I've come across. The first one is this idea of inadvertent CPD, CPD being continuous professional development, inadvertent CPD for many teachers. This is the case where teachers may not have had much online experience. They were suddenly, the school was closed down or the university. They were told to go into online learning. They'd never done it before. They kind of, managed, and some of them really did very well. It was a bit of a shock to everybody. Very steep learning curve. That's the expression I've heard most from teachers, that it was a very steep learning curve. But then quite a few teachers have said to me, wow, it's actually been really quite nice. I've enjoyed it. Teachers have also said to me that they love the mute all button. You can just mute your students, and it's absolutely wonderful. If only we had that in a face-to-face classroom, especially when we're dealing with noisy teenagers, right? So that's one positive. This hasn't been for all teachers, of course, but actually for, quite a few, considering just how unprepared some of them were. The second positive that I've come across is people mentioning the idea that blended online learning is now, it's on the map. We all knew about it before. Possibly some of us thought, well, it's out there. I don't really care. It's got nothing to do with me. But of course, it's had everything to do with everybody now for the past year. So that's been an important, I think, positive for the potential of blended and online learning. That has become clear, because if we hadn't had some form of blended or online learning during the pandemic, there would have been nothing. So, there's some good stuff there. Another positive is that teachers and learners have had to skill up a little bit in terms of digital literacies, right? They've had to learn to do things online that possibly they didn't know how to do before. So there's been that sort of part of the inadvertent CPD point, perhaps. This is something that I've heard and read about, that for quieter learners who may be less confident in the classroom, actually moving online, and especially with video conferencing, they've found this quite comforting. For example, small group work in breakout rooms can be very safe for learners who may feel less confident or maybe shyer or maybe not quite as outgoing as some of their peers. So it does seem to have given quieter learners a bit more of a space to come forward to be working in the online environment, the synchronous online environment. And teachers have also reported fewer discipline issues with younger learners and teenagers. Possibly not your cases if you're working in universities, but possibly those of you who are in bilingual schools, your teachers may have reported that as an unexpected plus. And if there are any more positives that you've seen that I haven't mentioned here, please do add those in the chat box. And we have one here actually from Anna. She said you've had to learn more about organization, structure, and habits. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, Alina. So of course, there were some positives, but there were also a few negatives. The biggest negative that has affected everybody, whatever profession you're in, is this possible issue with mental health, again, teachers and students. The isolation and the uncertainty around the pandemic has affected absolutely everybody, and some age groups more than others. Another one is that what has really come to the fore is this lack of teacher training in technology generally, and being able to move online. Teachers managed remarkably well, but there is a huge skills gap, and the kind of training gap became very, very obvious. Before we could get away with it, I think teachers could get away with not knowing how to run a Zoom session. Not anymore. So that skills gap still needs some attention. Another negative has been obviously physical space. So students at home having the actual, quiet space to be able to be in a live session like this, for example. And then, of course, the whole issue around access. So the digital divide within schools, where you have students who have access to the technology and no problems. There are enough digital devices in the family to go around, and those students who don't. Those who have broadband, those who don't. Those kinds of challenges have been very much highlighted by the pandemic, even in relatively high resource contexts like the UK or supposedly the US, and clearly in contexts, developing contexts, this has become a major issue. At the consultancy, which is my company, TCE, we've been working on a large project in South Africa at the moment, looking at how school content has been distributed during the pandemic to school-aged children in South Africa. English learning content we're looking at, and in some cases there's been obviously zero. So students have had almost a year out of school. So it's a massive issue with repercussions that are going to last, into the future, unfortunately. Another negative is the lack of materials that are suited to video conferencing and online learning, and also teachers having access to robust pedagogical models of how do we do this online and blend it, how do we do this moving in and out of the classroom and back online, how do we make it all hang together so that it's a robust learning experience for our students. That's been tricky for teachers. Another big area that I'm sure you've come across or at least heard about is the whole area of assessment. If students are working on tests and exams from home, there's been a lot of talk about cheating. This has opened up an interesting debate in the profession about the role of assessment, and if students can cheat, is this kind of the kind of assessment that we should be giving them in the first place? And I'll come back to that in a little bit. If you have any negatives to add that your institution or teachers or learners faced, please add that in the chat box as well. Okay, the impact on an institutional level. Thank you, Silvana. Zoom fatigue. Yes, Zoom fatigue for everybody on the planet, I suspect. The institutional impact of the pandemic has included these, which you know about, right? Permanent school closures, job losses. This has been massive across the profession. School closures, especially for private language schools, less obviously for universities. The question about which is the best teaching scenario for your school, what's going to work best, it's very difficult to decide. The issue of what your clients are expecting, and also what roles learners are expected to take on. If you're taking on blended or online learning, it's going to require a certain amount of learner autonomy. Are your students ready for that? The lack of teacher training has been apparent, I think, for institutions. The issue of having access to technology and the digital preparedness of teachers is another area. Cost. So are you going to provide laptops for your students who have to go and isolate for 2 weeks? Is that a possibility? Some schools in the US have what they call little kind of little backpacks that are ready with the books that the kids will need, and then a laptop, and then if a kid has to self-isolate and go out of the school, they take that with them, and then they come back 2 weeks later and they rotate these backpacks. But of course, having that little laptop or that tablet in the backpack requires obviously some significant investment. And then the last point there, if you are running face-to-face in-person classes again in the physical building, you're going to have to undertake physical distancing. And do you have the space? If you're a private language school, your rooms might be quite small, and having half of your students in the classroom might actually not be financially viable. And Melissa, yes, the unstable internet connection within institutions can be another issue, and of course for our students. Thank you for that. Okay, so just to quickly summarize some of the lessons that we have learned over this year. It's been a year already, unbelievable. Clearly, blended and online learning are here to stay. And I have been coming across institutions and teachers saying, well, we had to do blended, we had to do online, but we're not doing that ever again. This is something that is not going to go away. I mean, the cycling in and out of pandemics, and certainly with this pandemic, is likely to continue for at least a couple of years. I was reading in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, recently. A friend of mine is a doctor, and she sends me these kinds of links. They're predicting that there's really not going to be a calming down of this pandemic until about 2023, because of the whole issue of rolling out vaccines, not just in your country, but all over the world. And until that happens, this pandemic is with us to stay. So it's likely that countries are going to be cycling in and out of local lockdowns for some time to come. This is not just the pandemic, really, though, is it? I mean, situations of political unrest or natural disasters, these are scenarios in which schools really should be nowadays prepared to move into the blended and online scenarios as necessary. This fluid moving in and out of these various modes of learning, I think, is something that we've taken away from this pandemic. It can be done, and it can be done well. The second point there is that learning is a social endeavor. We've learned that, right? The whole mental health issue. When we're teaching our students during lockdown and they're at home, it's not a matter of sending them a bunch of PDFs and expecting them to send you emails back. There's got to be some sort of synchronous teaching like this through video conferencing, but also, reflecting good online teaching, which is not what I'm doing at the moment. I'm giving you a lecture, but we would be doing group work and pair work and in and out of breakout rooms and so on. That's the kind of synchronous online teaching that we would expect. And that takes into account the fact that learning is social, and indeed that language learning is a social and communicative endeavor. The third point, obviously, is that teachers need to be trained to deliver good online and blended learning. Anybody can get on a Zoom call, but to design a good video conferencing class takes training. Digital literacies are absolutely essential. I don't know whether you noticed in the books earlier, one of the titles that I co-wrote with Gavin Dudney and Mark Pegram is Digital Literacies. We wrote that in 2013. We're just writing the second edition at the moment. So digital literacies is really, to me, so fundamental. It's something that we should be teaching our students from primary school onwards, and that includes our teachers. Institutions need to be nimble or fast in order to be able to cycle in and out of these various modes of learning delivery. Assessment needs a rethink. If we are concerned about our students cheating in the multiple choice exam that we've set for them online, maybe we need to be assessing them in a completely different way. Maybe we need to be looking more at formative assessment and assessing things that cannot be copied or cannot be cheated on. So perhaps a more project-based approach to assessment is what we really need. And the last point here, of course, change is challenging and resilience is the key. And I'm sure this is something that you have learned yourselves over the last year. Okay. So just to summarize, essentially in a year, we've moved from this so-called emergency remote teaching. I personally don't like that term at all. I've been teaching online since 1997. So to me, this is actually the always normal, not the new normal. Anyway, we've moved from what people conceive as this emergency remote teaching to a point now where we can look around after a year and say, these are the things that we've learned, these are the things that we need to pay attention to. And now, within our institutions, we really should be at a point of consolidation. So really, getting the bases nice and firm so that we can continue to offer online and blended learning, ongoing, really, for forevermore. It's not a matter of going back to the old normal. okay, how do we do this, right? How do we future-proof? How do we not only survive, but thrive in this idea of the next normal? I like that. Instead of the new normal, the next normal, I heard recently. Well, there's a couple of steps I'd like to share with you. Since April last year, at TCE, we've been doing work with a number of institutions, universities and private language schools, helping them through this transition phase from the remote emergency teaching or emergency remote teaching to consolidation. And we've been applying a model that obviously needs to be adapted for each institution and for each school, but it does help provide a kind of a framework towards moving forward. And I want to share that model with you, which consists essentially of four key steps. The first one is needs analyses, not the plural, not needs analysis, needs analyses. You need to be running needs analyses with your key stakeholders. So those are your, obviously, teachers, your learners, your clients. What do they expect from online and blended approaches? Teachers, learners, and at your institutional level as well. So to be able to provide robust online and blended options, what does your institution need? Is it going to require, for example, stable internet connections, like Melissa's comment there in the chat? What else? So those need to be very carefully planned and then implemented. From that, you need to move towards training. So this might be kind of initial quick training, sort of training sessions, maybe on, how to design an engaging Zoom session, how to engage your students in an online lesson, that kind of thing, how to motivate your students in an online lesson, what kind of activities work well in breakout rooms, that kind of, just-in-time training is important. But you also need to be considering continual professional development within a wider framework. And CPD, to be effective, it needs, it needs to be ongoing, it needs to be cyclical, it needs to be supported, sustained, and it needs to have the institution behind it. So it's not just a matter of doing a few training sessions on how to use Zoom. It's a matter of integrating the whole online and blended option and the digital literacies that are needed into a really robust long-term CPD plan for your school. You probably have CPD plans in place, but you do need to integrate digital literacies in there. At least I think you do. All right, step 3. You need to be able to identify or design robust, integrated pedagogical models for online and blended. And by integrated, I mean these things all need to hang together in a meaningful way. If your teachers are running Zoom sessions or Google Meet or Teams or whatever you use, if they're running video conferencing sessions and they're going back into the classroom sometimes, or they're doing a hybrid model, or it's a synchronous plus asynchronous fully online model, whatever it is, it needs to have coherence. Things need to link together. So the asynchronous work needs to lead into the synchronous work, needs to lead back to the asynchronous work, and of course it all needs to fit into your syllabus, whatever that might be. But the models need to be planned and thought through very carefully. And then the fourth point is this idea of iterative piloting. So let's put together a model with, let's try it with our, our first year, engineering students who are studying English. Let's try this particular model. Let's see how it goes. Let's do a pilot, a short-term pilot, maybe over a term or a semester. And then let's review how it went. And then let's make some changes. And then maybe we roll it out to a few more departments in the university. This depends on your context, of course, how you're piloting, who your piloting is aimed at, if it's at a certain discipline or if it's at a certain age group or a certain type of English class, like your, your English for academic purposes classes, whatever that might be. But start small, review and iterate, and you'll get better and better at it. One of the big things that we've seen that with institutions that has got them into trouble is to say, okay, everybody, we're doing this way, and we're all doing it from tomorrow. And then the entire university has to take on board, for example, a piece of software, which has been, perhaps sold to the university as a solution to something, but it's not really. It's, a piece of technology is never the solution. It needs to be within a much more integrated approach to your online and blended your online and blended learning models. So just to sort of summarize what I'm trying to say here, to get from surviving to thriving in the next normal, I think you need the following: a strategic approach, which is supported by pedagogically sound approaches to blended and online. It's not just online, it's not just blended and onlining. And this is delivered by trained teachers. And trained teachers means just-in-time training plus part of a wider CPD strategy. Actually, I think I've managed to exactly keep onto my time there. It's exactly past. Good. Okay, I'm going to pause there because I would love to hear from you, your own experiences, any teachers, any questions that you might have, any experiences that you would like to share with the group. I don't know whether anybody's typing. John, will you maybe send some questions? Okay,
Yes.
All right, Anna's kicked off here in the chat.
Great, thank you, Anna.
Great. So Anna, your school, you've been fully online since all of this started, right? So you moved from face-to-face to online from one day to the next. And if there's any lessons you'd like to share with us about that, then please do. Because I'm sure this was the experience for most people, wasn't it? It was kind of one day to the next for so many schools, and really a bit of a shock to the system. Okay, there's a Q&A pod I've just opened here.
Yeah, so we have a questions from Silvana. Thank you, Silvana. Can you recommend research studies on hybrid learning?
I can indeed. Silvana, have a look at any of the publications out of Arizona State University. They've got a huge number of publications on hybrid. In fact, because I know Silvana, I can email you something. But there's also a really interesting study that I read, which is from 2005. I don't remember the reference offhand, but again, anybody who would like the reference, please email you. But just very briefly, it was a study run in a university in Australia in 2015, not 2005, 2015, using this hybrid approach. And what they did was across 6 disciplines, including like nursing. I remember one of the disciplines was Chinese language learning. So there was a language learning discipline in there. I think engineering, medicine, a couple more, maybe accounting. What they did was they looked at how this hybrid model was being used in these 6 disciplines by various teachers, and the hybrid being the people in the physical classroom plus people being beamed in. The beamed in people used a range of different synchronous platforms. In some cases, it was video conferencing. In some cases, it was a virtual world like Second Life. That reminds me, one of the disciplines was computing, and they used Second Life. And they did a couple of research. They did a research study, and then they compared across all of these 6 things. And they found, and this is probably not very surprising, that the main challenges with hybrid, well, first of all, that hybrid is probably pedagogically the most challenging for teachers to deal with. And I'm sure if you've tried hybrid teaching or you've seen your teachers try it, you know this. The teacher is dealing with the physical space and the virtual space at the same time. So designing tasks that will work, if you're just going to lecture, well, then it doesn't matter. But if you want to have, some kind of decent teaching model, you need to be teaching for communication. So designing tasks where you might have pair work or group work and how you combine the physical and the virtual space is a challenge. Do you have pair work, for example, with just people in the physical space and then pair work in the physical space? So those two get separate. And then there's some kind of feedback loop. So that's one challenge, task design. The other big challenge is the technology. People getting kicked out of the platform, having access problems, the ones who are being beamed in. And then the other thing is the kind of the logistics. So, how many microphones do you have? Who's listening to who? How do they hear each other? How do the online people hear the people in the classroom? Is there a microphone? Does it get passed around? Is there feedback through the speakers? All that sort of logistical, technical stuff is also a challenge. So those are really the 3 main findings that they found a while back, and I think have been reinforced perhaps by what we've seen ourselves experiencing hybrid teaching.
Thank you, Nicky. We've also got a question from Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. Can you give us some ideas of what kind of training teachers can receive for successful online teaching?
Yeah, I mean, well, personally, I've been running online teacher training courses in how to teach online since 1997, when I started teaching online myself. I was just thrown into online teaching, and I was working with a consortium of Spanish and Latin American universities. And I designed basically a kind of an in-house course so that we could help the master's degree tutors kind of get up to speed with how to handle online teaching. And that's something that I've been doing ever since. Basically, teachers, I think it's important for them to, where possible, experience learning online as a participant, even if they've been teaching online themselves since last March. The experience of being a student is always an absolute eye-opener in whatever discipline you're working at. So there are a couple of free online courses available, as far as I know. You could also attend webinars and so on. You could set up webinars or training for your own teachers where they share experiences, or you could do a slightly more structured or formal online teacher training course. I hope that helps, Melissa.
Thank you. And I think that covers Melissa's second question, which is you mentioned training on how teachers can create an amazing and interactive Zoom session. Where can we get a reference for this kind of training? I guess that's covered, but anything else you want to add, Nicky?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, this is something that we've been doing at TCE, because, as I said, we've been working with schools since last, April, really. And we found that in the beginning, schools approached us, because this is what we do at TCE. We do online teacher training and how to teach online. Schools approached us with exactly this kind of question, saying, oh, the teachers have suddenly had to move from Zoom since Friday to Monday. How do they do an engaging session? So we've been providing this very short 1 hour, we call it just in time training, 1 hour sessions in Zoom where we show them how to design, and we model motivating and students and task types and all that kind of stuff. So that's one kind of training. I would say that's the kind of emergency response, and then there's the longer, more considered CPD, longer form training to be taken into account as well. Melissa, please feel free to email me if you'd like to, and I can send you more information.
Great, thank you. And we've also got a question from Alina there. Can you recommend how to manage large groups in these online learning models? Getting students to participate is a big challenge.
Okay, thanks, Alina. Yeah, that's a good question. How large is large, first of all, if you'd like to put that in the chat box? How big are the classes in your institution? And while you're saying that, while you're answering that, I think we need to keep in mind that there are two modes or two modalities to online teaching. One is the synchronous mode like this, where we have a live video conferencing class, and then we have the asynchronous mode where students are working maybe in a virtual learning environment. So those are the two different modalities. 34 students. Okay, well, that's not too large. Our South Africa project, we're looking at classes of 60 and bigger. That's not too bad at all. So if we're talking about a live session like this in Zoom, I think what you don't want to do is what I'm doing with you, where you have the teacher just talking at the camera. We need to look at how a session, a 1 hour lesson or 45 minutes or an hour and a half, however long your classes are, how it's structured and set up so that there is time for students to be carrying out tasks in breakout rooms, working together, coming back to the main room, feeding back, going back into different configurations and so on, much as you would do in a normal session, right? In a normal bricks and mortar classroom, you wouldn't have the teacher standing there for an hour and a half, certainly not in a language class, I would hope. The students would be working in pairs and small groups. It's quite easy to replicate that in the video conferencing platforms that we have these days with breakout rooms. For the synchronous part, again, forum discussions, you can put different groups into different forums. You can create jigsaw tasks as you would do in the face-to-face classroom. The class size of 34 definitely lends itself to I hope that helps, Alina. Getting students to participate though, actually, Alina, the second part of your project, your question there, yeah, I mean, engaging tasks is the answer there. If the tasks are not engaging, the students are not going to participate.
Hello, Nicky. Just to draw your attention to Jose's comment there as well, of one of the biggest difficulties is not having the support of parents, and sometimes kids are all alone.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Jose. So you're working with younger learners, obviously, with kids and teenagers as well. One of the tutors who works with us at TCE is the Director of Studies of a large language school here in Spain. And they did, like everybody, from Friday to Monday, they went online, and they put together very quickly a kind of a working contract, if you like, for teachers, almost sort of an informational thing, explaining to parents exactly what was going to be expected for very young learners, so under the age of, let's say, 10, where they need to be supervised, right? Or, obviously 6-year-olds, you can't expect a 6-year-old to be in front of a computer totally unsupervised. That the parents would need to be supervising the kids for the lessons, which would be 45 minutes maximum. The lessons themselves would be designed to actually integrate the parents. I mean, that's also fun, they sing along, you get the parents singing along. So trying to have some kind of buy-in from the parents, through the necessary background information that they need, which would be documentation, and then also running meetings, online meetings, if they can't come into the school, with the parents to let them know exactly how you're going to be doing things, why you're doing things, and then providing them with regular feedback. I do understand in some cases that, if parents are working and the kids are, I don't know, 12, 13, then the parents cannot be there. So it's a matter of, I think, in your needs analyses, finding out what the parents' situations are, and taking those into account in the design of your various models. Oh, I see there's a question here from Phil as well. I'll just read it out. I'm not sure if everybody can see Phil's question, but just in case you can't. Phil says, there are so many challenges to the current situation, but what do you see as the key positive benefits of the pandemic-related changes? And which do you feel we should maintain in the future? Yeah, thank you, Phil. Yes, the key positive benefits, I think, are that the world has woken up to the potential of online and blended learning. I think that's the key positive benefit, and also the importance of digital literacies. I mean, I cannot stress too highly or too much how important it is to be digitally literate in the 21st century. Because if you're not, you are left behind. You cannot participate fully in society. And these, the increasing tech changes that we're living through, they're going to accelerate. They're not going to go away. So this is actually a fantastic opportunity for education to perhaps wake up to the potential for online and blended learning. It's not like we should do everything blended and online forevermore. Of course, there's always a place for the physical, classroom for students, and students enjoy the face-to-face contact with the teacher and with their peers. That's absolutely fine. But I do think that students coming out of this pandemic are going to expect their institutions to be a little bit more flexible now. I mean, if I'm a 35-year-old business person, going to my private language lessons, and I've been through the pandemic, and I can't come next Thursday, I expect you, my school, to give me an alternative. Let me come and beam in, let's find some sort of hybrid or blended or online option here. So I think teachers and students and schools need to prepare for that.
Thank you, Nicky. And also Anna asks, our school is hoping to start hybrid at some point after fully online, both synchronous and asynchronous. Since all this started, do you have any advice about the hybrid scenario?
Yes, do keep in mind that it's the most challenging for teachers, especially for the teachers who are less confident with technology. You're throwing them in at the deep end with hybrid. So my advice would be training. Let your teachers get as much training as they can, let them practice. So integrate that into your school or your university's CPD. Figure out all the logistics at institutional level, figure out what you need in terms of the technology and microphones and what gets plugged into what gets beamed into what. that needs to be, handled for the teachers. And then the teachers come in. They can't be hassling with all of the, what microphone do I use? They've already got enough to do just dealing with the two different spaces, the physical space and the virtual space. So the training needs to cover the technology side, and also, I think, effective task design. It's not the same to be setting a task in a physical classroom with everybody there than in a hybrid classroom where half of the class are in another space. You need to think about how the tasks are actually going to work so that the people who are not in the room also get as valuable a learning experience as those who are in the physical room.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicky. We're going to run out of time there. So thank you very much to the participants for your excellent questions. And thank you, Nicky, for a really fascinating session. A lot of takeaways there. I think having digital literacies as part of an integrated CPD program that's kind of long-term with the institution behind it seems to be a major takeaway for me. I also love that one of the positives is the mute all button for teachers. So I won't forget that one as well. So thanks again, Nicky, for putting this session on, and thank you all for attending.